Hello, I'm David Benites, and this is Extreme Vocal Institute. And today I'm going to be talking with you guys about how you should be practicing your metal vocals. This is a conversation that I have with all of my students here, and it's something I see talked about online a lot in terms of people knowing they need to be doing this and practicing on their own, but not being quite sure how. What the focus should be on, or how to kind of structure these sort of things to make sure that they're actually accomplishing the things they want to be doing, which is, of course, in whatever sense it means, for you, getting better. Now, first and foremost with this sort of thing, you need to be warming up. Making sure you're preparing your body for what it is you're going to be doing is of the utmost importance, especially with how intensive these kind of vocal styles are. Now, making sure you are doing things both for your metal vocals themselves and actually activating them in a nice, healthy way, and also making sure you're putting in the prep work with your melodic voice, even if you are someone that isn't singing for what it is you're doing with the music. Now, if you're someone who isn't sure how to warm up these different things, we have videos about these different topics here on our channel as well. But in terms of this, it's very important to just make sure you are putting in that work during the first part of when you're practicing to make sure that your body doesn't just lock up on you and stop you from making these sounds. This is something a lot of people struggle with. Say, for example, if you're someone that kind of just gets into your car on the way to or coming back from work and you're just screaming along to songs on the drive, if you don't prep first, that is creating a fair amount of wear and tear on you as well. And rather than feeling like you're getting better over time, you might feel that wear and tear kind of starting to take its toll. This is the same thing for when you're trying to prepare for vocalizing in different settings. You always need to be warming up first. So making sure you can set aside that time to make sure that's being done. So you can do different things like getting the vocal cords just moving in the first place with very light movement, say different siren sounds, which is something I talk a lot about here with making sure movement is nice and smooth and the body isn't doing too much work to get these things out. And from there, making sure you're taking your different sounds and activating them correctly to be able to then take the sounds that we're trying to project and make them go from being light to being the recognizable sounds we're going for in the moment. Now, the focus here kind of changes depending on what stage you're at. Say if you're super new to this, you're going to want to work on this kind of fundamental stuff first. So in that example, if you're new, you want to spend more time working out and laying down the foundation for yourself, working more on the melodic aspects of things, making sure your vocal cords are listening to you in the first place before trying to sprint right into screaming too quickly. Because again, like with any kind of physical activity, it's about preparing the body for what it is we're going to be doing. Now, the other aspect of practicing that's a big topic here is about how long you should be doing it for. We'll see things here a lot where people are borderline having like competitions for how long they're practicing for. Oh, I just practiced for 3 hours. Oh, I got to make sure I put in my several hours a day here and there. And you really want to be careful about the amount of time you're putting in. It is important to make sure you're practicing regularly to make sure you don't just totally fall off, but there is such a thing as practicing too much and for too long. Even when you're doing things well and balancing properly, vocally, you're still going through a lot. The body's still having to do a lot and burn through a lot of energy. And if you're really pushing it that hard all the time, that can actually cause more harm than good. It's important to set these kinds of goals for yourself and make sure, yes, of course, if you're passionate about it, just go after it, but be mindful of what it is you're doing. Example, it's more beneficial to put in little shorter bursts of practice on a regular basis, kind of like an every day, every other day kind of thing, rather than, for example, waiting until you have a day off from school or a day off from work and vocalizing for hours and hours and hours on end. Because you're not really accomplishing much if that's the only time you're practicing, and if you're just hammering it away until you can't even speak anymore at the end of that session. That's not going to get you to where you want to be. And that's tough at first, because especially if you're trying to get the sounds out, you would think you just need to sit with it for as long as you can. But it's actually more about the give and take, the back and forth that you can kind of create essentially with yourself. For example, if you have a few minutes here, a few minutes there on kind of an every day, every other day kind of basis, that's going to benefit you more because you're putting in that little bit of work towards your voice and then taking time off from it and then getting stronger from the work you did. Then going back, training a little bit more, resting again, and creating this back and forth to make it so you're actually developing and strengthening rather than just pounding away at your voice until it kind of gives out on you on a regular basis. That kind of sore feeling, or the feeling of the sound just not coming out right, that shouldn't necessarily always be your indicator that you can be done for the day. Where it's like, oh, I can barely make sound now. I guess I can put it away for now. You do want to listen to that and put it away if you get to that point, but you shouldn't have getting all the way to that point of being hoarse be the goal by any means. Try and balance things out a little more, especially the more often you're vocalizing. In terms of the days you're putting in, you'll start to become more familiar with your own body and your own tendencies, which definitely takes some time to get used to, but it's definitely worth doing because even if you are, for example, training with someone like me or anyone else, the person that knows your body more than anyone else is you. So take the time to develop this kind of relationship with it. Now, again, speaking of kind of really tapping into what the body can do, what the human body's really good at is recovering and healing and regenerating after we go through different amounts of physical work. This is why it's very important to, with your time management, not only make sure you're putting in enough days, even if they're short days with vocalizing, but actually plan those off times. You don't have to vocalize every day in order to be doing enough for yourself or whatever it is your goals are vocally. It's equally as important to make sure you're putting in the healing time as well, because that's how you can make sure you're actually benefiting from what it is you're doing. This is tough, especially in the beginning, especially if you're ultra excited about what you're doing, which I don't blame you if you are. You want to go after it and you just want to spend your time working on it because it's at the forefront of your mind and you just want to go, 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 go. But it's important to take that deep breath and give your body time to actually write in what it is you're actually working on. Because when you're resting is when all of the recovery is happening. And this is when your body actually adapts to all the work that you're doing by making all of these different muscles and structures stronger, which will enable you to do more as you continue forward on your vocal journey here and be able to increase your abilities, increase your endurance, increase your strength, increase your stability in terms of your vocals, and flexibility on top of that, which gets into my next point. Oftentimes, again, people practicing on their own, I see a lot of the whole just jumping in the car and doing songs kind of practice, because it is difficult in the beginning to kind of know which way to go, other than just singing along the songs that you like. Once you pass a certain point and you know you really want to go after this and go beyond just kind of singing along the songs and actually develop your own voice, it's important to pick a direction with what it is you're doing. It doesn't have to be like the end-all be-all, this is the only thing that matters to me, but anytime you're going to vocalize, have some sort of goal in mind, even if it's a temporary goal. Some days you might want to maybe, for instance, work on range. oh, I want to kind of see if I can get my voice to go a little bit lower than I've been able to recently. Maybe you can work more on lowering pitch, stabilizing the lower register of your voice, kind of work on your lower pitched screams. And along with that, after you've warmed up, make sure you're actually vocalizing along to songs, either of yours or other people's, that actually fit that kind of lower category. That's an example. If you're working on things like endurance, for example, oh, I feel like I burn out too quickly, try and work on stability and air management, making sure you're not working too hard to get sounds out, and then maybe try and increase the amount of time you can do things for on a regular basis. Maybe go for like 10 minutes one day, 15 the next, 25 the next after that, and kind of build from there. However, remember, like I said earlier, you don't have to be able to vocalize for like an infinite amount of time. Vocalizing for hours on end isn't really going to do much for you, especially because of the differences between how metal vocals work versus just the standard voice. What we're doing here with this type of intense distortion isn't really designed to be done for really intensively long periods of time. But like I said, try and pick a direction with what it is you're doing, because having this kind of goal in mind mentally helps the rest of the body actually lock into a task. And then the act of vocalizing quite literally becomes easier when you do this. You can pick a direction, wow, and really go for it in the moment with this sort of thinking, because now all of these different structures in the body actually have something to lock onto, because you avoid that kind of aimless practice type feeling when, especially, and I remember doing this a lot when I was younger, you finally have that period of time when you're free and you go in to vocalize and you're like, I have no idea what I want to do or what I should be doing. So you just scream until you can't anymore. And then oftentimes you can leave that kind of sitting feeling more frustrated than you did when you walked into it. Setting some sort of goal for yourself in the moment when you're practicing, even if it's for only 10 minutes, helps to make sure that you're keeping things positive as well. Your mental state when you're practicing really does matter. You want to feel good about what you're doing and not necessarily put in all this time practicing because you're feeling a lot of pressure to have to do so. You don't want to kind of make yourself anxious about this sort of thing. And that's a totally different experience for everybody. But you want to try and keep a nice, calm, and healthy mental state when you're going into doing something like practicing for vocals, because the clearer headed you can be and the more level you can feel in the moment, your body's going to agree with you more and kind of listen to more of what you're trying to get it to do and work with you, rather than say, if you go into that kind of thing super frustrated, you're going to notice more tension and the body kind of working against you. So, to that token, and this is again something I've dealt with myself many times, if you're having a bad day and you have a little bit of time to practice, but you just can't let go of that feeling, there's nothing wrong with not practicing that day. You don't have to force yourself to do any of these different things. Like with everything that I talk about here at Extreme Vocal Institute, nothing we're doing here requires force. And that includes making yourself want to be doing it at all times. Like I said, vocalizing every single day and for crazy long periods of time isn't how you want to do these sort of things, because both physically and mentally, it's very easy to kind of burn out. Example with the goal thing, kind of revisiting that, those goals don't have to be perfectly met every single day. You don't need to accomplish an entire new feat and take a giant leap in terms of your development every time you open your mouth. That would be crazy. You don't want to get too hung up on those kinds of things, because it can, again, make it very easy for you to be very hypercritical and judgmental of what you're doing. As long as you're putting in the work, you are making steps and making headway towards those goals that you're setting for yourself in terms of being able to further develop and advance in terms of what you're doing. Making the whole get better thing slightly more specific, so over time you can start to notice those kinds of things. Now, before I get into how to actually end your vocal practice in a day, it's important to understand another thing about this whole process, which is it's very, very hard to be able to gauge gradual progress. Again, this isn't something I relate to a lot, especially when I was younger, but I'm sure plenty of you out there, when you feel like you're just hammering away at these sort of things vocally, a lot of times maybe weeks will go by, maybe months will go by, and you don't feel like you're accomplishing anything, or you don't feel like you're moving forward or getting better. That can also get very frustrating. A lot of times that comes from the kind of habit which is just practicing the same exact things, the same songs, the same sounds, over and over and over and over and over again, to the point where you just kind of get stuck. And you feel like your progress is kind of being hindered as well. You don't feel like you're going anywhere. And that can make the act of practicing at all kind of daunting. And if you have that kind of negative feeling attached to it, it can make you not want to do it at all. This is why it's important to switch up what you're doing every once in a while. Don't just do the same things all the time. Not only is it good to set small goals for yourself when you're practicing, but switch them up every once in a while. You can have a totally different thing in mind every time you practice if you want to, if that helps you feel a little more flexible, a little more loose with what you're doing, so you don't get super bored in the moment or feel like you're not accomplishing anything. If you can kind of work in a couple of different directions at once, or kind of in a healthier way, like I'll say burn the candle at both ends, you can make it so your body on a technical level is actually in more of a state of flux. So you're actually able to trick yourself into developing a bit faster and a bit more intensely with a greater progress curve, like if you're looking at it on a graph per se. And this makes it so you can feel that development happening a little bit better and a little bit quicker, and kind of give you that feeling of satisfaction like you're doing something, just by switching things up on a more regular basis. But even then, sometimes it's a little hard to gauge. You want to trust that the work is getting you there. Sometimes what I'll say to my students here is to, even if you don't like what it is you're doing, use your phone if you have to, record yourself practicing every once in a while. And even if you hate what you did, keep it. Don't get rid of anything. Because after a couple months of practicing, you might not feel like you've accomplished anything, but if you look back at what you did, suddenly you have a gauge of where you were versus where you are now. And you'll notice a pretty significant difference, because day to day, it's hard to notice when these things are happening. But if you look at it over a longer period, suddenly it becomes very clear what you've done. So that's something I always recommend to try and fight off that feeling. Now, warming down. This is kind of the last step for practicing, regardless of what you've been doing. And again, even if you've been doing it well and in a healthy way, it's not like vocalizing isn't doing anything. The body's still going through a lot. And just like when you're going through any kind of physical activity, say like running, any kind of sports-related thing, any kind of workout-related thing, you want to get your body back to that kind of neutral state so that you don't spend the rest of the day super agitated and locked up, kind of on red alert, because this is where it becomes easy to hurt yourself. Like I've said before, this is actually where you're the most vulnerable. And in the example of a lot of different people who tour, for example, or vocalize very regularly, if you're, say, a recording artist, most of the damage that happens without realizing it happens in the period after you're done, and not even when it's actually happening. It's all about how you handle coming out of it. And the way that I like to have people warm down is through lots of different kinds of very open, gentle movement in the body, kind of like the warm-up in reverse. When you're done with your vocal session or practicing for the day, you can use different open-throated sounds, like example, long tones on vowel sounds, kind of in somewhere comfortable for you, to get yourself feeling back to normal. And you can kind of start to feel like this weird kind of chant. You might get a couple strange looks for this if you're having to do this in a group setting, but it works. And kind of calming the body a bit by going through these more open-throated, natural movements is going to kind of reset everything and make it so maybe the adrenaline levels go down a little bit, the body calms down, the heart rate slows a little bit, you can calm your breathing, and make sure that you get yourself back to that neutral point before you go about the rest of your day. And additionally, making sure you undo any kind of little bits of tension that you may have formed while vocalizing by stretching things out, both in the tongue, in the throat itself, in the whole body, to make sure that you can, again, go through the rest of the day without being super locked up and agitated, and as soon as you make a sound, just work too hard and hurt something by accident. Now, before I leave you guys today, another note I'll leave you with is you want to make sure you're also warming up for whatever setting it is you're in. Like I mentioned in the beginning, if you're someone who's relatively new, when you're practicing, you want to focus more on the foundation, the melodic, getting yourself stable and making sure the sounds start to activate in more of a proper way more regularly to make sure you're actually developing the voice from the ground up as best as you can and in a responsible way. But if you're past that point and you're starting to actually use your voice for things, even if that's just personal use, make sure you're warming up and practicing for specific purposes. If you're just working on your own, you don't need to practice for that long in order to make sure you're accomplishing what you want to be doing. If you're at like band rehearsals or something like that regularly, you want to make sure you're practicing along to whatever your material is. Say like you're getting ready for a show or you're getting ready to record. You want to make sure that you sound good doing your own material or whatever it is you're working on. So making sure you're practicing those things and make the actual focus more specific. If you're getting ready for tour, something like that, a longer string of shows where you need to vocalize more often, cycling yourself up to it with your practicing to make sure you can vocalize for the amount of time you need to, which, by the way, is never going to be more than like an hour, hour and a half tops with these kind of very intensive sounds, making sure you can just get yourself comfortable with that. So by the time you get to that period, you're able to do the things you need to do without having to take, say, like that first whole week to get comfortable and then do what it is you're doing. You can use practice focus to get there ahead of time. Same thing applies to the studio, where this is, say, like maybe the only instance where you need to vocalize for like more than an hour or two at a time. When you're actually tracking something and you may not have many days to do something, you may have to get it all done in one day. Cycling yourself up to that with your practice the same way someone would for a marathon. Working on the endurance training, being able to vocalize for longer and longer comfortably up to a point where you actually use it, and then cycling back down. That's more or less what I mean by making sure you practice for whatever setting you're going to be doing this in. And then lastly, keeping consistent with what you're doing. Not working on the same things all the time, driving yourself crazy and making yourself hate this thing that you're only doing in the first place, only watching this video of me speaking to you guys in the first place because it's something you want to be doing. But make sure you're just consistent in terms of how often you're working on these things. Vocalizing only once a week or once every couple of weeks isn't going to get you to where you want to be. You want to make sure it's at least something like every other day, situation depending. Doesn't have to be every day, doesn't have to be as long as possible. As long as you're putting in the work, you are taking the right steps towards where you want to be. Now, I hope this was helpful to all of you guys at home because, like I said, I see this kind of conversation happening all the time and talk about this very regularly with different people in terms of how to be able to practice. So use this video and everything I've said today to figure out how you can structure yourself in a way where you're accomplishing your goals and you're having a good time doing it as well. If this helped you today, go ahead and give this video a like and subscribe to our channel as well, because we'll be covering more and more topics like this as time goes on, as well as giving you the ability to see everything else we've covered so far to make sure that you are practicing and warming up effectively on your own over there. If you ever need vocal help, you can either look into lessons here as well at Extreme Vocal Institute, or check out our entirely online program EVI Now for more in-depth information like this. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, scream responsibly.